So let's do another ground reference maneuver, and this one's called a rectangular course. And it's designed to help you fly a traffic pattern when landing, but it's also a maneuver that teaches you how to correct for wind and maintain a desired ground track, and also to divide your attention between both inside and outside the cockpit. It's a maneuver that doesn't get a lot of attention because pilots think it's just too easy. But actually, it's a challenging maneuver to fly correctly, and it'll really hone your skills, especially on windy days. So there's three key elements of a rectangular course, and they are judging the wind, picking the right field, and flying an equidistant rectangular pattern. So we'll start by picking a rectangular shape on the ground, and it needs to have two long sides about a mile long. An intersection of highways works well, or a road pattern, or maybe even an abandoned airfield. And like all other ground reference maneuvers, you'll be low over the ground at about 1,000 feet AGL. That's typical traffic pattern altitude. Now once you have a field picked out, you'll need to know which way the wind is coming from. And we use the usual clues to figure that out, including smoke, dust, trees, flags, or ripples on the water. And it looks like today, the wind's out of the west. So now because we're low, it's also a very good idea to select an area where you can make an emergency landing if you needed to. A sparsely populated area is really the best place to practice this maneuver, and that certainly is where we are today. Okay, so we'll establish our cruise power at 2200 RPM, and that'll give us about 100 knots in the Skyhawk. And don't forget to trim. Now we'll be at 1,000 feet above the ground, and we'll be about a quarter mile out from the ground references for each leg of the field we picked. So let's start by making our usual clearing turns to the left and to the right. Make sure that nobody's in the area. We're going to start with our first circuit to the left, and we're flying it to the left because we're on the left side of the airplane, so we've got better visibility to the left. And also, standard traffic patterns are to the left. Now we'll enter on the 45-degree angle to the downwind, just like we enter the traffic pattern in an airport. And once we get established downwind, we'll have our fastest ground speed because the wind will be behind us. And we're about a quarter mile away from the field to make it easy to see our track along the ground. Now if you have any trouble estimating the distance for a quarter mile, just visualize about 4 football fields. That's about 1,200 feet, which is about a quarter of a mile. Okay, now we're coming up on the downwind leg, about a quarter mile out. And I'm banking slightly to join the downwind leg. Now we're coming up a beam, meaning opposite from this end of the field. And that's where I'm going to start my left turn. So this will be our steepest bank because we're downwind and our ground speed is the highest. Okay, I'm starting our bank, and I'm keeping all our banks under 30 degrees. And this is the steepest one, so this one will be right at about 30 degrees to start, and then transitioning to a medium bank as we finish. Now I'm turning slightly more than 90 degrees of heading change because I have a crosswind from the left. So I'll establish a small crab angle to the inside or toward the wind here. And as always, we need to fly coordinated without slipping or skidding. Okay, we're coming up on our next beam point on the field, so I'm going to start my next turn. And this turn is a medium to shallow bank because I'm coming from crosswind to upwind, so my ground speed is slowing and it doesn't need to be as steep. And now we're on our upwind, so the ground speed is the slowest since the wind is blowing right toward us. And this next turn will be less than 90 degrees to establish a small crab into the crosswind. And because I'm upwind, my turn will start out shallow and then will go to medium. Okay, so here's my beam point once again, and I'm going to start my turn. And once again, this turn from upwind to crosswind is less than 90 degrees. So I'm going to select a heading that I think will be just right in order to maintain our ground track and correct for the crosswind. So there it is. That looks pretty good to me. Now we'll be going from crosswind to downwind, so this turn will be more than 90 degrees heading to roll out parallel to the downwind reference. There's my beam point, so I'm going to start my turn. and I'm going from a medium bank to a steep bank as I turn downwind and my ground speed increases. And I'll roll out of that turn, and now we're headed straight downwind, once again right back where we started. And once again, we have our highest ground speed. So that wasn't too hard at all. Just like everything else in flying, it just takes a little practice. Now let's talk about what can go wrong in this maneuver. Well, like all ground reference maneuvers, you need to divide your attention between inside and outside the airplane. A big mistake is fixating on the panel or focusing just on your airspeed or your altitude. This is primarily an outside maneuver. You only need to look briefly inside for a quick how goes it, and then make any corrections on the outside. Now second, you need to be aware of obstacles and other traffic, and you need to be accurate on maintaining your airspeed and your altitude. Now for the Airman Certification Standards, you need to maintain your altitude within 100 feet and your airspeed within 10 knots. And finally, remember the key is varying your bank angle depending on your ground speed and crabbing when crosswind in order to maintain your ground track. That'll give you accurate results. Now, as always, flying coordinated is not just impressive, it's the key to being a good, safe pilot.